Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, and welcome to our second episode of gCaptain Weekly. I am joined by the CEO, Captain John Konrad of gCaptain. John, how are we doing?
Doing great. Doing great, Sal.
It's good to see you here. We had our first episode in the can. I think we got some good feedback, some constructive feedback. So we're going to try to incorporate that into our future broadcasts. And again, please, log in, subscribe to gCaptain Weekly. Go get in there and get our updates every week. So, John, I want to jump right into it this week.
Hit the subscribe in YouTube and also that notification bell.
And also the weekly newsletter,
Thumbs
or
up.
the daily newsletter is a great one too. I always go with that too to have. So, John, let's just jump right into it here. I want to talk about a couple of stories that have been going on here. And this one is one that really struck me. This is the SEACOR Power search continue. This is about the lift boat that went out. This is the story specifically right here and I was wondering if you could talk about this because I am not someone who knows a lot about offshore drilling and these platforms. If you can give a little bit of feedback on that in context for what's going on here.
Right, a lift boat is basically a jack-up rig platform. So they come in various different types, as you can see here. This one's got a crane and unit to support the drilling rig, and then next to it is a helicopter one. And some are just accommodations vessels, so they just put them out there to be kind of floating hotels. But basically, this is a barge that goes, and then when it gets to location, they drive down the pilings, and that lifts the boat up out of the water. So you can kind of see with the schematic there. But this is a barge, and it's a top-heavy barge. So I got a bunch of emails, and one person asked me, what can be done to prevent an incident like this? So they were moving this lift boat from one location to another when a storm came in, and there are various reports of gusts between 60 and up to 90 knots. We're not exactly sure what hit this boat, but it caused the vessel to capsize, and unfortunately led to the tragic loss of life. But the question was, what can we do to prevent an incident like this? And there really isn't a lot that you can do. These are not designed as ships. And as you can see from that diagram, there's very little freeboard under the water area and a lot over the water. So they're very top heavy, and they compensate for that for being, on a wide barge, but they're not designed for heavy seas. So you can only move them when you know the weather is. So that's one thing that we can do, is better awareness of the weather. But I think also what we should be doing with all of these lift boat maneuvers, because things change, right? Sometimes the weather sneaks up on you. A very easy solution that can be costly at times, but not nearly as, money is only money, it's not lives, is when these move, they should be moving with crew boats. And at the first, sign of heavy winds coming in, they should just evacuate them and let them float. And you'll see after a hurricane, there will be numerous vessels like this throughout the Gulf of Mexico that are just floating away because they've been abandoned or pulled on their tow. So that's, either do that or build them stronger. But to build them stronger, you'd have to build them like a ship, and it would be exponentially more expensive. So.
Yeah, I got to imagine, because, this image right here, the picture right here, this is actually the bottom. The left side here is the bottom of it. You can see the leg, which they use the jack up, they use to stand on the flat platform there, which would actually go on the sea bottom, and they would actually lift themselves up out of the water. This is, again, what we're seeing right there. You're just seeing one corner of it right there. And I got to imagine with the jack up legs up like that, they're top heavy as anything. I got to imagine too, in a rough sea, that the pendulation, the swinging of them is just a terrible thing to happen. And so you're right. I mean, again, here's a weather issue that we've seen before comes up, and the fact that there wasn't a crew boat following behind them, at least to get the crew off in time. I mean, we're talking about what, a dozen dead on board. I know the divers were down on the vessel yesterday trying to see if there's anybody still alive on them, but they still hadn't been able to find any other people on board with the 12 still missing.
And there's another story that was very popular this week. I mean, you don't have time to go into depth. We should do a whole other episode on it. But Transocean, which was the owner of the Deepwater Horizon and the BP oil spill disaster 10 years ago, they had a very close call late last year. Again, because a hurricane was approaching. They had a well control situation down below. They couldn't get away in time, and there was a call. The engineers, the senior subsea engineer, the engineers said, we need to disconnect, do an emergency disconnect and get away. The captain wasn't sure. Shore was brought inside, and the captain and Shore decided, hey, we're going to stick it out. And they came very close to having another Deepwater Horizon type explosion and disaster.
Right, and that all comes down to cost. I mean, you break away, it costs money to reattach, get yourself back in, lose production. But again, the potential of there, and you literally wrote the book on Deepwater Horizon, is the catastrophic loss when you lose power and all of a sudden your dynamic positioning system doesn't allow you to keep in, and you can't detach from the well. You're going to yank the well, and that's what happens. You have that catastrophic loss where you just open up basically the ocean bottom to a nonstop pouring out of oil under pressure.
Right. And we've had this debate. We have it in the early 80s. A U.S. flag drill ship, the Java Sea, went down, I believe, in the South China Sea and lost over 80 people, died. And, they had the drilling guy was in charge and the captain was secondary. And the CFRs came in and said, the captain has to be the OIM. And then all the drilling just reflagged foreign, where they didn't have to follow the CFRs. And there wasn't the enforcement. The BSEE and the Coast Guard did not enforce the CFRs on these foreign flag, even though they could, because they're drilling in our EEZ. So you have the company, you want to put on fault, but you have the company, and it's the company's fiduciary responsibility, senior managers, to maximize shareholder value. Luckily, most people realize that operating safely is the best way to protect shareholder value. You lose a lot of money with injury and death lawsuits, but that's one way. And then you have the captain whose obligation is saving lives and the safety of his ship and the lives aboard his crew. But then, the critical thing is the Coast Guard is in charge of enforcement. I had blown the whistle before the Deepwater Horizon. I called the Coast Guard. They didn't investigate. There are a number of other cases where they're not investigating. And the we have a very good discussion in the forum, the lack of enforcement by the Coast Guard and BSEE in a lot of these instances really puts the captain in that bad situation. When I know the Coast Guard's going to back me up, or when they give me an order, it's easy for me to make the right call against the office. And I said, well, the Coast Guard's going to come out and they're going to fine us. And that's an easy call. When the Coast Guard and BSE does not do good enforcement, and I want to say they have not been very proactive on the enforcement in the last 10 years, that really puts the master of the vessel, in a situation. And it's what's unusual about this is the fact that the captain chose the office over the recommendations of his engineering department. That's what's crazy about this, the Transocean thing.
Right, and what you're talking about there, again, for everyone to understand, is we're talking about the Code of Federal Regulations, which governs basically, American ships. But again, one of the things we see is these drill platforms, a lot of these offshore platforms flag out to different flags, Marshall Islands, other flags, and therefore they can basically operate under different rules, different regulations, even though they're within the American Economic Exclusion Zone of the United States, which becomes a big sore issue. And you talk about that great in your book when we deal with the Deepwater Horizon. let's go over and talk about what's going on in Suez, because that's my topic right there. Everyone's favorite ship is still sitting there in the Great Bitter Lake. We did
Why is it still sitting there, Sal? That's an excellent question.
It is an excellent question.
I thought ABS came on, American Bureau of Shipping came on and inspected it and said she is safe to sail. So why is she still sitting there?
Well, they said she's safe to sail, but there was an interesting comments here. Evergreen put out an official statement here the other day in which they talked about this. They said the ABS had come on board. The UK P&I also put out a statement where ABS said they're clear to move up to Port Said for further inspection before sailing to Rotterdam. But as we know, there was discussion between Evergreen and their insurance companies and the Suez Canal Authority. And I particularly enjoy this statement here. It's in the UK P&I Club, where they talk about the claim presented by the Suez Canal Authority also does not include the professional salvage claim for the salvage services. They're basically putting a claim on the vessel of $916 million, which is interesting because they had a meeting on 12 April. They talk about here, a carefully considered and generous offer was made to the Suez Canal Authority to settle their claim. Obviously, the offer was not generous enough.
They don't define generous.
No, they don't. The UK P&I nor the Evergreen letter do not define what the generous offer was. And having gone through the Suez Canal in 3 experiences, I can tell you if you
for me, a generous tip, if you want to tip us for doing this podcast, a generous tip, I think for me would be $1 million for me and maybe $500,000 for Sal. I think that would be generous for me.
I think I need a little more than that.
Okay, $1 million and $1 million, but what's generous in terms of the Suez Canal Authority?
Well, obviously, I mean, part of the claim by the Suez Canal Authority, because they broke it down in these statements, 300 million of that is because basically to use the claim in the Evergreen letter that they put in here, $300 million claim for loss of reputation and so on to the Suez Canal. So the Suez Canal's reputation has been, tarnished by this, and it's going to cost at least $300 million US to get that back. So I think it's clear that we're seeing the Suez Canal in a very unique position. They have the vessel, they have the cargo, they have part of the crew. They did let 2 of the crew members go the other day. 2 crew members asked to leave the vessel. I'm going to assume one of them was not the master. They let them leave. The nation of India has made a formal protest against Egypt about holding the vessels. I'm wondering about what's next here, John. And I got to think the next step is for them to sail the vessel up to Port Said and begin to offload the cargo at the APM terminal up there.
What's interesting is, you got, I'm pretty sure Evergreen, who's the charterer, wants that vessel gone because it's basically a floating billboard that says, you messed up, Evergreen. So I'm sure Evergreen wants it gone. The Suez Canal obviously wants it gone because it's an embarrassment for them as well. And the cargo holders, the people who have, and they think there's at least $1 billion up to 3.5 is the highest $1 billion worth of cargo on board that vessel. Those cargo owners want the ship gone so the cargo could go off. But there's also the issue of general average. The ship owner declared general average. So is it in their best interest to kind of wait? Because every day they wait puts pressure on the cargo owners to help pay that claim, right?
I agree, but the statement by Evergreen, again, their last little paragraph here, Evergreen is investigating the scope of such a court order and studying the possibility of the vessel and the cargo on board being treated separately. It sounds like they're trying to get the cargo treated as separate. Since the general average has been declared, if they can get the cargo off the vessel, maybe they can get the vessel clear. I also got to imagine behind the scenes, the shipping companies, the big container liners, the alliances cannot be happy about this. There's got to be some issue about them making an example of one of their vessels. I mean, every day, Maersk, CMA, Costco, they're all going through there, and again, they represent 85% of the world's container capacity. They cannot be happy with the idea that the Egyptians are basically holding one of the ships hostage to extract this money from them. And it just
under arrest.
They arrested. Again, I had explained that in my video where I did a video where we talked about this, where ships can be arrested basically and held liable for the costs incurred from them. And again, the vessel will be held. And we have an example of that with Egypt. They've been holding, what is it, a Syrian ship since 2017. BBC
With just the
did
chief
stories.
mate on board. They had him,
just the one who's got to swim ashore.
here, sign this. He signed this quickly in the stack of paperwork, and now he's responsible for that vessel and has to swim ashore.
He's got to swim ashore every 2 to 3 days, get food, water, and charge his phone. I mean, that's a horrific story. And you got to imagine that the Indian crew on here and Evergreen, just obviously they don't want this. They don't want this vessel being there. She's a eyesore, basically. The pictures are being posted every day of vessels sailing past her, sitting there. So I don't know how they resolve. I think the next move is then to move it up to Port Said and offload it, but they're not going to move it up there to shore. They're going to get the cargo off her because they can't put her on the berth there because she'll just take up space. Plus, what do you do with 15,000 boxes?
Well, what's interesting is going back to the fact that, I was on Al Jazeera and they said, what needs to be done? I said, we need to improve technology on board this vessel. We should have the black box coordinating with VTS. And so we can stream all of that data, maybe not the voice, but all the other data, so that there can be assistance. And I want more into detail with that. But Al Jazeera, the host there, his comment was like, well, how's Egypt supposed to pay for that? And, we talked about these mega ships going into the port of New York and the billions of dollars each port has spent in dredging and raising bridges and everything else. And the question is, how are we going to pay for that? And the taxpayers of Egypt shouldn't have to pay for this. And the taxpayers in New York shouldn't have to pay for this. But they do, right? They end up having to pay. But what it just blows my mind is the fact that Egypt can say easily, or what's preventing Egypt from saying, all right, Evergreen, go, you may leave, but if you don't have payment in 10 days, we were blocking all other Evergreen ships and all other UK P&I ships. And
that's what I don't understand.
They have the port in New York that spends these billions of dollars. They're in the power seat. They can say no to these companies and, but they haven't. No one has said no to these mega ships.
And that's the thing that you're exactly right. I mean, again, if you let her go, she's coming back. I mean, she's got to come back that way. So it's not like you don't have an opportunity to get your money from Evergreen. I mean, Evergreen is again, the 7th largest container line in the world. They have ships going through the canal almost every day. And like you said, they're a member of an alliance, which, if the canal decides to stop transiting those ships to get their money, they're going to get their money. They're almost acting almost like the Somali pirates of the early 2010s, where they got an opportunity for a vessel and they're trying to extract money from it in some ways. And it doesn't look good for the Egyptians. I mean, it really doesn't. They don't look good in this situation at all. They looked great getting the vessel off, clearing the canal as fast as they did. Now they look like it's just a shakedown. And everyone who's ever been through the Suez Canal has stories about this. And it's just not looking good for the government of El-Sisi. And I got to imagine, once the container companies or the cargo shippers start realizing that how much it's going to cost them, they're either going to write off the cargo, not want it anymore, or they're going to start making some protests in some ways. I just don't see how they get the money from this in any way that makes them come out looking good.
And where's the IMO and all of this? They were right. They sent a representative right after the Wakashio and famously fumbled, and the International Maritime Organization was in the headlines for months and really got a black eye, especially with Forbes magazine did a series of articles. And they're very quiet on this, but if we want more technology, if we want better rules, if we want better regulations, it really has to be held by the IMO. And that's another thing, the Suez Canal and the end recipients, and they get some special voting privileges at the IMO, but not a lot. They can use this entry, to force the IMO, or I guess, why haven't we heard from the IMO is my question.
Well, I'm interested why we haven't heard from them. You're exactly right. This is a violation of UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, allowing free transit and passage through here. The Convention of Constantinople, which regulates the Suez Canal, the signatory nations should say something about it. And I would think major nations would say something about it, because again, if the Egyptians can do this to the commercial ship, they can do it to any ship going through. They can deny passage to anyone going through. This is a military issue. This is a trade issue. I'd imagine countries like China would be issue, but China's not going to come to bat for a Taiwanese company right now, obviously. But they're looking at this. I mean, the countries that are looking at this and advantageous is going to be nations like Russia that want to open the Arctic. Sit there and say, hey, this wouldn't happen if you come the Arctic route. There's no choke points here. You can just come through here and you're off you go. We can't stop you. You don't need pilots at all to come through here. So it'll be interesting to see how they play this out. It's just one of those stories that we see happening. The other story that came up, which was really interesting, is the Port of Los Angeles did their quarterly report. And can I be clear, the job I want to have is the president of the Port of Los Angeles. I mean that's a good job to have, I think. And based on the suit the guy wears, he's got some good money right there. But they had banging year this year. Port of Los Angeles seems to be doing extremely well. They're moving.
And not only the port, but these container ship companies. Did you see Matson Lines just announced their quarterly earnings and it blew the doors off of Wall Street expectations? I mean,
yep.
There's a lot of money flowing around in the container space right now.
Well, and I had an interesting discussion about Matson the other day, and talking about the fact is you would think Matson would want to, lease some ships, bring them over, get some more ships on there, but they play the high end of that trade. They're trying to, advertise a set schedule. The smaller ships mean they can offload faster. One of the things I didn't realize in again, watching the president of the Port of Los Angeles talk about, and I had never really thought about it, is his port is so unique because they have to discharge so much of the vessels. It's not like ports in China, which load maybe, a quarter to a fifth of a vessel at a time. He has to offload almost half to, 2/3 of a vessel most of the time. And these huge vessels just create a lot of problems for him because he doesn't have the layover now between vessels because he's got such a huge lineup out there in an anchorage. And he's got issues with the rail lines. He said they were holding cargo on the berth there for 11 days for railways. I mean, it's taking over almost 2 weeks to get cargo off of railways. And that's a long time.
It's not just this vessel, Los Angeles is the container. They've invested container. Then Long Beach invested in oil and bulk and all the other things. And all these ships now are having trouble getting the new very low sulfur fuel. So they're coming out of Panama, coming up to Long Beach, fueling, and then going over to China. So you have a huge influx. And it's all these unexpected consequences. And, a lot of the big issues are not even being talked about there. You have a absolutely crazy fish and wildlife police department in California. I mean, these guys, I was taking my sailboat out one day and they boarded with M16s when my son was sick. So maybe I have a little angry bias, but really pushing, that small boats have the right over bigger ships and really imposing this. And then you have, the pilots. It takes 3 years to train as a pilot in many ports. And so you've had this enormous influx just in the last 6 months, but it's going to take them 3 years to get more pilots. So you got to be wondering how much overtime are they working and what other strains are on the system.
Right. And that's, that's all those elements we've talked about with infrastructure and how it all kind of correlates together. We're starting to see some appointments now from the Biden administration in some of the roadside positions, but again, we haven't seen an appointment to the Maritime Administration yet. And again,
have you gotten the call? We talked about last week about you potentially being a Maritime Administrator or deputy.
I haven't received a phone call yet. I have not gotten the phone call from the Biden administration yet. So I'll keep looking. I got it right standing by here. So in case they call, we're standing by right here.
But there are some rumors going around, and they're rumors. What I've just very quickly, I've spent a few days dealing into this, and I've confirmed that the bad news, I'll put that out first, that maritime policy is a very low priority for the Biden administration, as it was for Obama. So that's the negative news. This is not a front burner topic, which is sad because if you spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure to widen the bridges, and you're going to invite more trucks. That's what we learned with Robert Moses. If you build them, they will come. And those trucks are what's causing the global warming and eating up our roads. So you create a bigger problem if you don't move that cargo to more efficient. And the more efficient is rail. And there isn't much real estate for rail and sea. So, and it's just not a priority for them. It's just not a priority. And we've talked to the Navy about, because they had so much activity with the sea lift under Admiral Busby, really worked hard and did a great job pushing that. So you and I have both talked to some admirals about it. Maybe they can put some of their political influence in the MARAD, but that's the bad news. The good news is, and we have no idea who's going to get it. There are a number of candidates, but there are a couple of captains as candidates for Maritime Administrator. And you're the historian. When was the last time with the FAA, usually the FAA director, which is the equivalent of MARAD, right? He's usually a pilot. When was the last time we had a captain in the MARAD seat?
I have to go back to, I think it's lead back is the last one I would have to think about. I'd have to go back and look and really see. But, we had an admiral, we had Busby, Buzz was MARAD administrator last, and rotating it between military and civilian, not a bad idea and everything. The problem has been in the past is the political appointees in here who have no background in it. And that's really a key thing.
And we've had junior Navy. We had an 05 Navy person who did his best, but he does not have access to the CNO when you're an 05 submarine commander.
No, and more importantly, you don't have the standing with commercial firms either. And you really you don't have the time to learn this job on the run. You have to.
Busby had 2 stars and he was on the board of director with Carnival, I believe. So and a graduate of U.S. Merchant Marine Academy.
Yep.
So
you gotta, you don't have a lot of time. You got to hit this thing running. And one of the things that really, I fail to understand why they don't like to invest in this stuff is this produces revenue. Unlike a lot of other things that they spend money on, this produces revenue. It may not be dollar for dollar back, but in the long term, it will pay for itself. You will get revenue from it. And I would think an investment in, one of the things you want government to do is invest in things that basically you can't get a public group together to invest in. A highway. That's not something people are going to invest in unless they turn it into a toll road, and that's what you want here to free this up. Because what you're seeing in Los Angeles and Long Beach, and now it's spreading to Oakland, terminal is congestion. And it's not just the vessels and the ships, it's demand. Basically ships have met the demand for cargo. They've gotten bigger, they've gotten larger. The problem is when you come into ports that can't handle them, can't process it. Add to it the strike right now in Los Angeles, by the truck drivers and potentially the longshoremen adding in. We've got a partial strike in Montreal. This is when you're going to have labor strikes, because this is the best time to have a labor strike because you're in short supply and demand.
And going back to, the Suez Canal and the, who's the most powerful influencer in the entire maritime domain? It's those Long Beach longshoremen, and there's a lot of complaints about that and all. But they shut down the port. Who else shuts down the port? I'm not advocating that, but we have to let the Navy and the policymakers know that we have that power. I mean, when COVID hit, we shut down rails, we shut down trains, we shut down airports. We couldn't shut down ships. I was talking to a pilot who was going. The local fire department was giving him hazmat suits because the fire department was essentially shut down. They weren't having chemical spills, but he was going to work every day.
Yep. And shipping kept trucking right along. And that's, one of the things. And we still have not been able to get IMO to get, seafarers and port workers deemed essential workers in every country around the world. This is amazing to me. It's just absolutely crazy.
I got a cheap solution though.
Well, true.
I got a cheap solution.
Oh, go ahead.
And everyone's going to hate it. And I always get flack when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Let's take $1 billion. I said cheap, right? Well, how much did the Bayonne Bridge raising cost? How much do these mega ships cost? How much of the dredging? How much is the trillion? What's 1 billion compared to the trillions of dollars and thing? And let's give that to education. Let's have an innovation center at Kings Point. Let's give these state maritime academies, and not just them, but the unlicensed. Let's build out Piney Point and teach welding and machine shop and all of that, and give it to where, on market part-time for Black Sail, maritime AI company, blacksail.ai, at MIT. We think Silicon Valley, we tend to romanticize the Jeff Bezoses, the Steve Jobs, the individuals in the country, but it's really the Silicon Valley inspiration came from the military. It was DARPA funding Stanford University that created Silicon Valley, and still pours billions of dollars into it, and we don't pour. How much money gets poured into maritime innovation, Sal? You're a professor at U.S. Merchant Marine Academy.
Not enough. I can tell you that much right now. Nowhere near enough is put in.
Let's double the budget of Kings Point.
Yeah.
That's the thing I'm going to get flack over, but I'm standing by it.
Well, I mean, my salary at Kings Point as an adjunct professor is the lowest item probably on the Kings Point budget. So I can tell you that much right there. Let's go over this story. This story amazes me too. This is one that you guys have been following from the very beginning at gCaptain. And I think it's just another one of just this kind of, man, we just can't seem to get things done in the right way. This is the salvage of the Golden Ray in Brunswick, Georgia. Vessel rolled over in 2019, still waiting for the NTSB report, by the way. So this is over, what, a year and a half ago now, and we still don't have it. And I can tell you what it is right now. I know what caused it, but, you know, I got to wait for the NTSB report to come out. But this salvage is just, and fortunately, they were able to get this vessel out of the channel, or else they would have blocked a major car carrier port in the United States. Would have had
the pilot. Let's give
the pilot did.
He's been commendated. He did an excellent job of, all right, I'm beaching this thing out of the channel.
He was able to get it out of the channel because, again, I have no inside source. I haven't talked to anybody involved in this, but I'll tell you right now, they didn't take ballast because they don't want to take ballast in the river. So they want to keep their tanks clean. So they were, you know, they were heavy. They were light on the bottom. They were heavy on top because they didn't want to move their cargo because that costs money to reshift cargo. So they were probably top heavy as anything. They hadn't taken ballast yet because they didn't want to take river water in. They want to get out into the Gulf Stream, take clean water. And what happens? She rolls right on over. Ship built 2 years prior to this rolls over. And the issue at play here is the salvage of this. This was the nightmare scenario with Evergiven. What happened if that salvage had gone wrong with Evergiven and she
well, what was interesting about this salvage is Smith was designated, you know, OPA 90 requires that you have an oil spill response, and Smith, I don't think they did the oil spill response themselves, but they were contracted to do the, you know, initial response and salvage, and they came up with a whole salvage plan. And then the P&I Club said no. And there's actually lawsuits between it saying, so this was put on pause and it was delayed. And finally they got another, you know, excellent salvage team in there. But there was a huge amount of delay and a lot of debate over whether this is, you know, they first developed this technique with the tricolor. And what it is basically, have you seen those? You can buy those mini saws when you go backpacking in the woods where it's just, you know, saw blades on a string and you could cut through. That's basically what they did here. They got a string with diamond serrations on it that cuts through the layers of the ship. But Smith is very adamant saying that this was not the quickest and most environmentally safe method. And it was very unusual for the Coast Guard to come in and side with the P&I. And that goes back to the enforcement things we were talking about earlier with the lift boat and Transocean. Is where's the Coast Guard in this conversation? They seem to be more and more agreeing with whatever the money interests are.
Yeah, I mean, because what they came, I believe that if you look at what Smith was going to do, they were going to do kind of what they did with Costa Concordia, roll her back up, float her up, and get her out and everything. And granted, you weren't going to salvage the vessel. I mean, she was too heavily damaged, but you can get her, you know, pump her out and float her back up at that point. Because remember, you had all the vehicles in her. All the vehicles are still in her. You know, they haven't offloaded anything except for fuel oil, supposedly, from her. And what they're basically doing is what you're talking about is just slicing the vessel into pieces. They're just, you know, just basically slicing the vessel with basically anchor chain. And you can't tell me that there's not material spilling
right
off
through
this
pipes
vessel.
And oil tanks and
Right,
everything
through
else.
the vehicles, through the carpet. I mean, if you look at the sides of the vehicle, you see the, you know, Kias and I think it's Kias in there. Don't buy a Kia if you're in Georgia. It says it's partially water damage. It's coming out of this vessel.
Oh, they don't. And that's another, even the most minor car carrier disasters, we've covered a few where there were whole levels of cars that weren't damaged at all. And they ended up scrapping them because if someone gets in an accident 10 years later, they're going to sue Honda or whoever it was. So once a ship goes bump in the night, the whole cargo gets put in the in the wood chipper, the metal chipper.
It's just an interesting story again because of this debate about how this salvage was going to go on, and now you see the salvage dragging on. And I got to imagine there's going to be long-term implications in Brunswick Sound. I mean, this is off Jekyll Island right there. It's a beautiful area. You know, you got golfing on one side, you got a natural preserve on the other side. And I got to imagine that there's going to be some pollution elements in here that's going to really dog this entire wreck going in the future. And like I said, they're still encountering problems. You know, who knew that cutting through a main engine is going to cause problems? You know, to me, I would think that would be fairly easy to identify, but obviously not right now. So they're just having these issues trying to get this vessel out. The last thing I wanted to talk about, John, was this is as we're running out of time, you know, record profits, you know, for container shipping. You know, I happened to look the other day at Evergreen's stocks and over 5 years, and man, they're just banging it through the roof right now. You would think, you know, the issue with the grounding and even the $1 billion by the Egyptians would put a dent in it. It's like, no way. Expansion plans are in full force. You know, they just contracted for 20 new ships, dropped $2.6 billion for Korean yards to start building themselves new ships. Almost every company is building new ships. That's for Maersk. I think Maersk is hedging on IMO 2050 and the fuel issues that are out there. But I mean, everyone's bullish in this market and everything. I was wondering if you want to comment about that just a little bit. Yeah,
and the ones that have relatively new, the best performing stock in IPO is ZIM. ZIM is just raking in the cash, and their stock, you know, we suggested last week a few of these stocks, and they've continued to go up. Actually, they're the only thing in my portfolio currently going up. As it seems the crypto and the Doge coins everyone's leaving everything else to go in there, but not the container. And how strange, an American flag shipping line, Matson. Yeah. We don't expect profits from any shipping company, but we really don't expect profits from a public American. And it's not just container ships, but the bulkers have already gone up. The dry bulk index is close to all-time high or 10-year high.
Yeah.
And then the tankers a little behind, and then, you know, the LNG. Our friend Jay Mintzmeyer did another update. You can go on his Twitter and see his video of the best stocks. I think Navios Marine was top for bulkers. Zim was for containers. Flex LNG and International Seaways for tankers, which is an offshoot of overseas. It's split up, and you know, it's run by an American CEO, and it's out of New York City.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive to watch it right now. You know, Qatar made that big announcement about building more LNGs. It's hard to battle them. They've got their shipping company right there. I forget the name of it. It's blanking on my head all of a sudden, but they put in a big order for LNGs. And so they're going to be a major player, obviously, in the export. But like you said, even Matson. But again, Matson has a unique position, you know, because they're in a protected trade with the Jones Act, but their vessels are smaller, which actually pays off for them because, again, they can offload, you know, their vessel in less than, you know, a few hours. They can get up against a berth and get out.
And they have new steel, right?
Right. And then they can move containers quick. And, you know, that's the problem with these big container ships in some ways. They're a big liability in some ways. They take too long to get in. And, you know, as a U.S. flag vessel, they can get priority in the berth too and get in there and get out and keep things moving, which makes it a big advantageous for them. I think, you know, going forward, we're going to see a lot of movement in the industry right now forward. You know, the problem is everyone's ordering stuff from home. That, you know, consumer goods are up through the roof. And the problem that we have, at least in the United States right now, is getting the material off the terminals to people. That's what you're seeing. Your Peloton bike is not coming anytime soon because it's sitting there, or computer chips are piled up in a container and they can't get there into appliances. So it has these ramifications. And one of the things that I think we keep talking about that I think gets a lot of interest to people outside the maritime industry is how this impacts the daily life of them and the long-term impact we're going to see with the industry going forward. John, you got any last-minute things you want to add? We're
inside the industry. You know, what I struggle with is we get a lot of rumors, and some are fairly well substantiated, and I can't share them unless we can get people to go on the statement gCaptain, but on a video, I don't know how free we are with rumors, but there's, there are rumors floating around of a massive personnel shakeup at Matson, and that there's pressures being pressed on by companies like Peloton to get younger, more technologically savvy people into these companies. Hey, if you want us to support the stock price, if you want our cargo, you need the Silicon Valley, and Flexport is another. Everyone knows Uber and DoorDash just had an IPO, and Airbnb because they're recent, but Coinbase just blew the doors off this crypto. But wait until Flexport. If you go to Silicon Valley, people aren't talking about that as the major unicorn. They're all talking about Flexport. And they've digitized the manifest of container shipping, and they still have a lot of work to do. But I mean, raking in cash. But now this pressure is talking to the International Seaways CEO at Marine Money. She was talking about how the ESG initiatives and how she's meeting with money managers and clients, and they're pushing a lot of these demands for lower emissions and more timely schedules. So I just heard those rumors in the last couple of days about Matson, but apparently there is pressure on to get more tech savvy people in these spots in these companies. And I think as it expands, I don't know if there's a need to fire the people who are there, because you've got to combine that with the expertise. But
well, I think that's what you see with a lot of these, the big firms that are out there. They do have a mix. You've got the seasoned, grizzled captains, and those have been doing this for forever. But at the same time, you bring in those people who maybe have no experience from shipping, but they look at it from a new eye. And more importantly, they have business, they have public affairs, they have these, innovative technology elements. I've been following Flexport. I gotta tell you, I try to follow as many people from Flexport as I can, because I think they have some interesting ideas, and they really present different ideas than what you get from kind of typical shipping companies in some ways. And I think that's one of the things we see going forward, that the U.S. has got to catch up on, that these other nations and other firms have been able to do. Well, John, we're up against time here, so we're going to call it a wrap here for our second episode. I want to thank John Konrad, CEO of gCaptain, for joining us. I want to recommend everybody to subscribe to gCaptain on YouTube. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, hit the bell so you'll be told when our new videos come in. They tend to drop on Sundays for the Week in Review coming up. We will also, of course, have any breaking news that we need. We will go ahead and throw that together and put it out there.
And your videos, you have your own.
I have my videos on my webpage. Feel free to subscribe to my webpage. Follow along. I'm following the Ever Given quite extensively, and doing things that John won't let me do on the gCaptain site, like have a day and talk about a history topic in some way and break it down. John just absolutely despises those, so I get to do those on my own YouTube page.
How many history books I got here?
I know you do.
I'm reading Dead Wake now.
Well, I got some books too. I got some books back here too.
I read his other book, Garden and the Beast, and I was like, I don't really like it, and but I want to read. You read Dead Wake, and I'm reading it now. Fascinating.
I like Dead Wake. For those of you who don't know, Dead Wake is the story of the Lusitania and the U-20.
Oh, here we go. I thought you had to leave.
It's a great story. I do have to go. I do have to leave and everything. But please subscribe. Again, the gCaptain newsletter is a great thing to get, and check on gCaptain all the time for any of your maritime news. So until next week, I'm Sal Mercogliano. That's John Konrad, and we will see you next week.
All right. Thank you, Doc.